Hello, I'm Professor John Rolfe and I chair the Independent Science Panel for the Gladstone Healthy Harbour Partnership. I'm here to give a little bit of an overview of how the Gladstone Harbour report card is structured. So Gladstone, a major port and industrial city located in the southern part of the Great Barrier Reef, it has lots of different industries there, but it's also in a very important part of the world for its environmental assets. Because of that, there's a lot of environmental monitoring going there to make sure that industry exists without having impacts on the environment. So the challenge in measuring this is that we have a lot of variation in the environment because of different environmental drivers. So the conditions in Gladstone Harbour vary because of the different impacts on the harbour, and sometimes because of major natural events such as cyclones and storms, and that makes the assessments challenging. As well as the environmental drivers, there's a lot of human-induced pressures. So in that case, there may be impacts on the environment because of things from industry or from society or from up in the catchments. So the challenge in assessing the condition of the harbour is to separate out the environmental variations from those human-induced pressures. Now this isn't a challenge only for Gladstone. This is a challenge in many other areas of the world, and one way of doing that and being able to communicate the results is to use report cards. These are essentially a way of summarising very complicated science and monitoring systems and summarising them down to be able to into a small number of indicators that make sense to a wider audience. They're used widely to assess conditions of water and coastal systems across many countries. They make the science more accessible and interactive, and they provide simple and powerful assessments of the condition of an environmental system. Normally they are done every year, sometimes less frequently. The examples here in this slide and some of the ones to follow show examples of different report cards that are used in similar systems to Gladstone. The Gladstone report card was trialled in 2015, and it's had full report cards since 2015. It's led by a partnership of government, industry and community agencies, and the annual report card and the monitoring and design is overseen by an independent panel of science experts. And their job is to meet the community vision from Gladstone that Gladstone has a healthy, accessible working harbour. Report cards work by selecting the most important things to measure from the environment or other dimensions, assessing their condition at a point in time, normally annually, comparing that measured condition to a standard or baseline, calculating the scores from that comparison, and then packaging them up or aggregating them into an overall grade. So these are examples of other report cards around the world where each year the report process aggregates scores up into a grade and then packages them up into something that's easy for people to understand. In Gladstone, the report card is broken into 4 main groups. So there's one group for the environment, one group for cultural, a third one for social aspects, and a fourth one for economic aspects. And I'll talk through each one of these in turn. The environmental indicators, one lot of indicators measure the amount of pollutants that might be coming into the harbour. And to do this, first water quality is assessed for physical chemical characteristics, for nutrient levels and dissolved metals. And sediment quality, which might measure the accumulated pollutants, is assessed for metals and metalloids. In the In the environmental indicators, in the second lot of environmental indicators, ecosystems are assessed. This includes assessments of corals, seagrass and mangroves. They're assessed in the zones where they occur. So for instance, corals are assessed in 2 zones and seagrass in 6 zones and mangroves in all the zones. Basically, the measures assess the area of those ecosystems, their condition, and in the case of corals, the amount of juveniles, that's the number of young corals coming through, and macroalgae, which is smothers the corals and is a measure of the potential for juveniles to take over existing coral structures. In the third lot of environmental indicators, there are measures of biodiversity, and in this case, the measures cover fish and mud crabs. Fish are assessed by looking at the abundance of juvenile fish, so how many young fish are coming in each year to the system, and the health of mature fish. And the health is assessed by photographs or visual assessments and by pathology, so looking at the internal organs. Mud crabs are assessed by catch and release programs where the measures capture the abundance of mud crabs, their size, their rust lesions, and the sex ratios, which give a bit of an indicator of the relative abundance of males and females, where only males can legally be taken. In the social indicators, this assesses the amount that the community interacts with the harbour. The measures look at the usability of the harbour, the access to the harbour, and livability and well-being. And in essence, the community is surveyed each year and asked about their satisfaction, their perceptions, and their use of the harbour. The cultural indicators are measured in 2 ways. The first is to look at the sense of place, which measures the extent to which the Gladstone community has pride in the harbour and feels connected with the harbour. And the second is to look at Indigenous cultural heritage. And in that case, it looks at the status of cultural sites in the region. So what is the physical condition of Indigenous cultural heritage sites? And secondly, looks at the management strategies that protect those sites and allow Indigenous people, traditional owners, the ability to maintain and assess those cultural sites and maintain their knowledge. The fourth component of the Gladstone Harbour report card looks at economic indicators, and this again covers 3 main dimensions. Economic performance looks at how wealth is coming into Gladstone from shipping, tourism and commercial fishing. Economic stimulus looks at how that money is being transferred into the local economy by measuring aspects such as employment levels and socioeconomic status. And the economic value component looks at how that wealth is being used to enjoy the harbour. And for that, each year the recreation levels are measured by looking at the recreation use of the foreshore, of beaches in the area, of fishing in the area, and other water-based recreation such as boating. So in summary, the purpose of the Gladstone Harbour report card is to provide an assessment each year of the overall health of the harbour. It's one of the most comprehensive report cards in the world, and it's underpinned by a very comprehensive monitoring program that each year assesses a number of different indicators and considers them against a number of benchmarks and other scientific evidence. It's one of the few report cards to go beyond environmental factors and include social, cultural and economic assessments. And it's certainly one of the first to include specific indicators for some elements of the report card, especially fish health, mud crabs, mangroves and Indigenous cultural heritage. Thank you for your attention.